If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, urban explorers, what is the creepiest thing that has happened to you while exploring? The El Camino Cemetery in San Diego is at the bottom of a canyon. It has a drainage tunnel that runs underneath. The tunnel is 7 feet tall and about 150 feet long. It's the width of a single-lane road. It's made out of that spiral corrugated aluminum tube, but it's a giant size. There are no bars or anything at either entrance or exit, stopping you from just strolling in. I guess that makes sense, because any bars would stop debris from passing through the tunnel. I think it has a bend, so you can't see the other exit. But I'm too chicken shit to get within 20 feet of the entrance. You know, in case the dead come sprinting out or I disturb a swarm of vampire bats. This was in a village up in the hills. The sun sets there pretty late during the summer, but the hills get extremely quiet after sundown. One day in June a couple of years ago, around 8 p.m., I was walking around an isolated area, exploring. There was a tiny road, on one side of which there were some houses. On the other side, there was a huge valley. This road led to a forest, which monkeys frequent, and I wasn't planning to go there since these monkeys tend to be hostile. I took a turn inward after the houses stopped. There were dusty roads here and some heavy undergrowth. I was about to turn around since it was nearing sunset and it gets very dark right after. However, I kept moving and suddenly, in the middle of nowhere, found a clearing. The bushes had all been removed. It was a perfect circular shape, and there were some thick branches that were kept in place of the perimeter, perhaps to prevent people from entering. I dislodged them, stepped in, and saw a bed of logs that was placed in the middle of the clearing. It was covered by a white sheet. It looked like a funeral pyre, but you can't just hold funerals anywhere randomly. That place gave me chills for some reason. I could hear monkeys howling and birds chirping all this time, but there was complete silence in the clearing. I turned around and saw that the branches that I had displaced to enter were back in place. I got very spooked out and left immediately. Old house that used to belong to my dad's friend. I found a lightly stained mattress that belonged to a heroin addict inside. There was a notepad next to it that had creepy shit like "I can't and he hurts me and please stop," but the one that made my heart skip a beat read "Don't look up." I was walking in the woods behind the vacation home of one of my uncles and just kind of wandering. It's a well-populated area, so I wasn't super worried, and unfortunately, I wasn't super cautious either. I walked into what I thought was a patch of snow and fell through thin ice into a rushing river. I had one of those I guess this is it moments and just kind of accepted my fate. The next thing I knew, I was in the bank, about to take a step onto the river. I was bone dry in mid-stride, and I just kind of turned around and walked back. It was like time had rewound itself. A friend and I were once doing a bit of urbex in my hometown, a small town in mid-Wales. There are a lot of old buildings in the area, and the mishmash of architecture makes the rooftops in particular an interesting maze to explore. On this particular occasion, which was probably around 2006-07, we decided to climb around the old noonery. It was a cold, clear night, which made for good visibility but wasn't so chilly that our fingers would get numb while climbing. Perfect. We found our way up a low wall in the alleyway beside the building, which in turn led us onto a low roof at the back. I went first, and while I was checking out the area for cameras, I glanced up at the building. In the top corner window, pressed against the glass, was an old woman with no eyes. Her skin was pale, and her mouth was hanging open. Where her eyes should be were two gaping blue black holes. She wasn't moving. I was so horrified that my brain went into overdrive and took in every detail. I even remember what her teeth looked like. I turned, shaking, and went over to my friend, who had just made the ascent. He was shocked by how pale I was and asked if everything was okay. I told him to walk out there and look up at the window. I was hoping he'd see nothing. I wanted it to be a trick of the light. Puzzled, he walked out and looked up. He froze, and I watched the color drain from his face. After a solid minute of staring, he turned and came back to me. "It's probably a bear or a dog or something," he whispered. He was shaking. It sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but it was his attempt to rationalize the situation. I was having none of it. "I'm going back out there," I told him. "And if it's still there, we run." He nodded. It took several minutes to psych myself up, but I went out there and forced myself to look. It was still there. No trick of the light, no teddy bear. There was no wrinkle in the curtain. I tried to see it like an optical illusion and force sense into it. It was an old lady with no eyes, a mouth open, and a face against the glass. We ran, and we never went back on that roof again. During high school, I was introduced to the abandoned barracks of Fort Ord near Monterey, California. At the time, It was just a fun abandoned place to explore with my friends, but soon I was informed of a legend that started to make encounters more chilling. A classmate of mine told me of what he thought was a disgruntled homeless man who would roam the site. He told me this guy was violent, rabid, even. The guy told me that he, for some reason, had horns, which I thought was an exaggeration, but I suspect that the guy may have cutaneous horns. One time I went alone to explore when I came across a foul-smelling underground room. There was an old mattress covered in grass and trash, as well as what I suspect was a deer carcass on the floor of the room, along with more tiny bones and feathers that most likely belonged to an owl. I hightailed it out of the room and headed home, as I did not want to come face to face with whatever was dwelling in that place. I've been back from time to time and have heard some scary noises, like screaming and loud thuds. If anyone is out exploring this place, I urge you to proceed with caution, as I know that whatever this thing may be, he is still there. As a child, my father was a security guard, and he had a job working the night shift at an abandoned hospital. From what I've read, the hospital opened in 1988 and closed in 2003. My father started working there as night shift security in 2004. I've always been close with my father, and he would bring me with him to work. He would just sit on the computer between rounds and let me explore the abandoned buildings that made up the hospital. I had many paranormal experiences during the time he worked there as the night security guard from 2004 to 2011. I saw a bunch of things. It was my first experience there. I was exploring, and I had wandered into the old ICU when I heard humming coming from one of the rooms. I walked in there, and I saw a young woman, probably about 20 with long black hair and blue eyes, sitting on the bed. She was very pale and wearing a hospital gown. I saw her and immediately froze, just looking at her. She quickly realized that I was looking at her, and she turned her head and looked at me. When we made eye contact, she smiled at me and said, "Hi, little girl," then disappeared. I think she was just a lost spirit, one of many that were in that hospital. I saw many other apparitions in that hospital, including seeing her again multiple times. I was around 8 to 9 years old when this happened. I lived in Beaufort County, South Carolina, in a neighborhood called Edgefield. I was playing outside by my backyard when I decided to go into the very nearby woods. Being a curious younger kid, I was just walking around exploring, but not going too deep as my parents advised me not to, and I was a pretty good kid in general. I started to hear a sound. If I remember correctly, it sounded like it was coming from above but also all around me. It sounded like a mix between a woman singing and an instrument mixed together, maybe a flute? I'm not sure exactly what instrument. It pulled me into some sort of trance, making me feel the need to walk deep into the woods against my parents' will. I complied with the urge and started walking deeper into the forest, but suddenly I heard my mother's voice call me, from the direction of the yard, not the woods, and that snapped me out of it, and I ran back. And that was the end of it. I am a 24-year-old guy from Bulgaria who had this encounter a few years ago when I was a teenager. It was one of those days during summer break where I'd visit my grandparents occasionally to let off steam after the end of another school year. One of my cousins was quite insistent on exploring an abandoned old house right next to ours, which he believed was haunted. As we entered the front yard, I had the uneasy feeling that we were being watched, but my younger cousin thought I was joking and brushed it off. Once we were at the house's yard, I saw the cellar door of the house move slightly inward, but there wasn't any wind, causing us to dart away from there. The next day, he and I went to a smaller area right next to that same old house to play with a soccer ball. As time passed, I felt something again while passing the ball to my cousin, which caused me to turn my attention to that attic window of the old house, where I saw a shadowy figure grinning back at me, but I neither flinched nor screamed, I just stood still with a neutral expression. In what felt like a full minute, I shook myself out of the thing that just happened and turned to my cousin to ask if he saw it too, but he didn't believe me. That creepy grin the thing had on its face remained a memory in my mind, but I still remember the encounter to this day. Clark Road Mental Facility. I went to this property 3 to 4 years ago, on July 4th. It has been torn down since, I think, 2003 or something, but the land remains just a large field. I got there around 9:30 p.m., my first time ever going there to ghost hunt. Right when I opened my car door, I parked by the gated old pool area on the left where people claimed to hear screaming. I opened my door to set foot, and I heard and felt someone running up to me. I thought it might be a kid. There were kids and parents on the other side of the woods doing fireworks about half a mile away, and all of a sudden I heard an extremely loud screaming right in my ear. I looked around, but there was no one. I shut my door and sped around the parking lot fast as duck looking around, and nothing happened. I sped home very fast. I also thought I heard screaming on the way home on I-75, but it was fireworks. I was so shocked that I almost crashed. This time it was just fireworks. I have never had anything like this happen before. It was human screaming, possibly female, and I never went back alone. I went back a few more times with my cousin and his girlfriend, and we took probably around 100 pictures and saw a lot of stuff we thought might be orbs, mist, and even a few that looked alien-like and greenish or red, almost humanoid or alien-like. I haven't been there in years, but I do question if the girl who died there followed me home for more than a few reasons. So my husband and I went to explore this creepy, super old house in the middle of the woods of Oregon with 3 of our friends. We had fun exploring it, then started to head back, having about a 2-mile hike ahead of us. At some point on the way back, I saw this person sitting down and sobbing. He or she had on really baggy clothes and looked very dirty. They had their heads in their laps, so I couldn't see a face. I had a very strange feeling, and for whatever reason, I just kept walking without going over to help or something. I saw all my friends looking at it, but were totally silent. We all started walking a bit quicker, though. Anyway, we kept walking in total silence, and everything just felt weird for a few minutes. Finally, one of our friends says something along the lines of "that guy was really strange." That's where things got really weird. My other friend says, "Guy? I just saw a dog." Well, that eventually led to us all discussing what we saw. I saw the crying person, one of us saw a dog by itself, one of us saw a man mocking us as we walked by, and one of us just saw a sleeping person. I still don't know what to think of it. Every once in a while, I'll go urban exploring with one of my friends. Usually he just checks out abandoned houses and the odd factory or two. It can be a really cool experience for anyone who is into history, photography, or asbestos inhalation. Today, though, he decided we're going to a local abandoned hospital at night with just the 2 of us because it'll be more intense that way, and he's evidently never seen a single horror movie in his life. Despite my mild hesitations, we end up getting to this place as it's starting to get dark. We make our way in through a window that someone has torn the boarding off of, and my friend gives his usual yell throughout the building, announcing his presence, so we don't startle anyone else who might be inside. By his logic, we're doing a courtesy to anyone else exploring the building who might panic if they heard us coming otherwise. By my logic, we're announcing our presence to every homeless person in the building who might want to steal a camera from 2 dumb kids. Despite my fears, nothing bad happens. We make it through the building, going through multiple floors and checking out the roof last. The whole building is pitch black except for the few spots where moonlight shines through, so we literally can only see whatever we happen to be pointing our phones at the time or by using the flash on the camera. Even though I'm still worried about being murdered, I'm glad I went, and I'm less freaked out as we're making our way back to the window we came in. We get back to the room, and I hop out the window first and have my buddy pass me the camera. As I take it from him and he starts climbing out the window, a soft voice from what sounds like just 10 feet or so inside the building says, "Wait." I look around my friend and can just barely see a silhouette standing in the doorway from where we entered the room. Now, I'm not proud of what happened next, but in that moment, the force with which my butthole puckered propelled me away from that building with enough forward momentum to last until I was at the edge of the property, back towards the road. My friend followed after me quickly, more so to laugh at me than out of fear. He didn't seem to be too worried about it, though he agreed we definitely weren't going back. I know this isn't the most exciting story, but what terrified me at the time was that I was 100% sure we were alone in that building. It was dead silent aside from us. The fact that the man waited until right as we were leaving horrified me, as it made me realize they could have been watching and following us throughout that entire building. Just listening to us talk, watching us take pictures, just following us. A few years ago, when I was about 14, my mom and I went to this abandoned hotel where my grandparents spent their honeymoon back when they got married. When we pulled over, there was an old man sitting on a white plastic chair outside of the main entrance. He looked like he was some sort of keeper. He told us that the place had been abandoned for some years but was recently acquired to be remodeled and open for business again. He let us go in to walk around. I remember walking through the lobby. Behind the counter, they had the shelf where they kept the keys for the rooms and mail. There were still some keys and paper there. The usual broken window and graffiti with all the furniture and stuff left behind gave me an eerie feeling. After checking out the pool, we go back through the lobby and make our way through one of the halls that lead to the bedrooms. I tried opening a door but it was either jammed or locked, so we walked to the next one and I turned the knob, pushed it a bit and someone slammed it shut from the inside. I remember I looked back at my mom and without saying anything we both started running to the lobby entrance. As we got closer we started walking so as not to raise any concerns from the old keeper. As we stepped outside to the big open space where he was sitting, we, still rushing to the car, thanked the keeper. 5 steps further we turn our heads to say thanks before finally getting to the car but the guy wasn't there anymore and there were no corners nearby he could have gone. and we were close enough that if he had ran we should have heard him. About 4 years ago, my friend Alex and I very briefly dabbled in urban exploration. It wasn't something I'd heard of, but he introduced me to it and told me about a place he'd been reading up for the past few months, Severall's Hospital. It's close-ish to where I live, but part of the draw was its history. Severall's was a psychiatric hospital that was mostly shuttered in the early 90s. It has since been fenced up and fallen into severe disrepair. We used to explore this place in the middle of the night to avoid any security. All in all, we went 3 times over a 2-week span at the end of 2009. As soon as we stepped over the fence, I felt something was off. Not surprising perhaps, one of the first places we stopped into was a complex of rooms that we figured were probably once quarters for live-in staff. There was a small courtyard around a few of these buildings, which were each 3 or 4 floors tall. When we headed inside, my edginess intensified. I told Alex immediately that I didn't like it and didn't want to continue, but he wanted to snap some pictures. So we agreed that I would remain by the door, near the stairs, while he would go up and get some photos. Fine by me. After between 5 and 10 minutes of grabbing shots, he comes back down and we head out. Next we decide to head across the courtyard to some shed-like buildings. Midway across, from directly behind us, in the building we just came from, was a massive metal clang. We both froze and swung round. The rule we'd established on visit number 1 was that if we were worried about detection, torches went off. So we switched off, standing in the middle of this pitch courtyard, staring in the direction of the noise, our hearts about to burst out of our chests. After what felt like an eternity, I whispered, "What the duck was that?" Alex's answer, "It's just the wind." But we still didn't move, and then, after another dozen or so seconds, the wind did blow. The gentlest breeze, nothing capable of what we heard. So I said, "No, that's the ducking wind. The wind did not make that noise." We waited in terror for a few moments longer, and the clang came again. That was when we decided had to move. Maybe other people were in there with us, maybe not. Either way, we needed to go. So we headed directly opposite from that building, ducked through some of the sheds and did a loop. It was frenzied, but after enough distance we calmed down enough to continue our exploration, figuring if we were accompanied unknowingly, we'd shaken the trail. 20 minutes pass, we follow a route we've gone before, and come out into a room that was once a cafeteria. I was halfway across the room, Alex was near the archway, and from behind us again, now from the corridor we just came through and half a hospital away from where we heard the first 2, is another booming clang. Like a vast metal door being thrown closed, we freaked the duck out. Torches go off. I bolted behind the vending machine. A moment later Alex joins me, and the 2 of us crouch there, staring at the corridor from where the noise just came. We're expecting people, because there must be someone else in there with us, except if there are, and they had to be ducking close, there are no lights. It's just darkness, total, complete darkness. In the lowest whisper I could, I said to Alex, "On 3. He nods, I count, and then we bolted, and I will always and forever be thankful for that other doorway. I honestly do not think I've run so fast in my life. We ran as fast as we could, finding our way outside. There's a road that loops several times, and we found it and sprinted all the way back to the fence where we'd come in. Over we hop, tearing back across the field, down the track, and all the way back to the car. It was terrifying. Even talking about it now makes me cry. I have no idea what on earth happened. Someone was probably in there with us, surely, except for what Alex said afterward. Because back in that cafeteria, I heard another metal boom. But he heard footsteps. I have no idea what to think about that. Strange stuff is all around. I haven't been back since, although Alex has once. Every now and again, I get tempted and say we should return one last time, but I honestly don't know if I can handle it. Certainly not at night. No way. I love exploring places. A couple weeks ago, I came across this spooky as hell looking abandoned church about in blue from where I live. I grab my roommate Tyler, and we decide to go scope it out. We pull off the interstate, and immediately we lose service, and the area we are in goes from "oh, what a nice small southern town" to "I'm going to be eaten alive by inbred hillbillies." There are houses that look worse than abandoned buildings that I've explored, but people are still living in them. It's strange. But we continue down this road, descending further into the boonies, slowly losing our nerves until we find the road that the church is on. We make the turn, and very suddenly the road gets very small, narrow, and all windy, which somehow raises the creepy factor even more. We are driving super slow, so we can look out into the woods to find this church. We are passing little country houses and small farms, and I see it. I swear to God it's just a man standing in the dark holding his phone, hands down by his sides. I can clearly see the dim light of a phone illuminating his pants just barely. Tyler is driving, doesn't see, and just implies it could be a scarecrow. But aren't scarecrows typically up on some supports? I mean, whatever it could be, right? I'm already spooked, so I could just be freaking myself out, so I ignore it. We keep on down this road, and dang dudes, this abandoned church came out of nowhere in the woods. We went around a bend in the road, and it was just there, towering over us. It seemed to be the brightest thing out there, even though no lights were illuminating it. Creepy as hell. Tyler gets spooked and, understandably so, decides he doesn't want to take his chances on it this night. He's driving his car, his rules, but for once, I do not argue and I'm just happy to leave. We turn around and start going back the way we came down this road, and this time I'm determined to make sure Tyler has a better look at this scarecrow when we pass it. We drive up to that point and see the silhouette. This time something's different, I don't see any light on, and its arms are up like how you would picture a scarecrow. Still no frame or supports, but it's enough for Tyler to laugh at me for thinking it could be a person. Whatever, I could just be dumb, I guess. But that's all that happened. Me being me, I crave that feeling of being scared, and being honestly the most creeped out I've been in a while, I wanted more. It took me weeks to convince Tyler to go back with me, but I eventually did. Tonight we got back on that road, and everything had somehow gotten more overgrown than it was, which added a layer of unfamiliarity to a place I should arguably know since I've been there now. Anyway, the first thing I'm obviously looking for is that scarecrow. We get to that field, and guess what Tyler did? Nothing is there. No scarecrows, nothing. This makes both of us uneasy, but now we are just paying attention to the road, trying to get our minds off of it. Out of the blue, I hear this cartoonish dog barking or biting sound, and out of the corner of my eye, there is just this dark mass roughly dog-shaped, but the only thing I could see for sure was the teeth and the flash of yellow-brownish canines. Inches from my face and the rolled-down window. So obviously I'm startled, and I turn around to see what I assume to be some dog illuminated in the taillights on the road behind us, but no. There's just a doe standing calmly right behind us. Tyler didn't even hear or see whatever had just happened to me and just completely brushed it off on me, seeing a deer and getting startled, which irritated me. I know what I saw, I think. So frick it, we drive on down to the church, park, and start walking up to it. Two things set us off immediately. The first thing the brush had hidden was a surprisingly hefty looking barbed wire fence that we could not cross. The second thing is a person, or scarecrow, Tyler, standing in the front yard of a house nearby. Tyler recognized this one as absolutely terrifying this time as well because it's not on supports but just standing there with its arms out, completely self-supporting. The arms are even slightly bowed down, like someone who has been holding their arms up for a while is having trouble keeping them straight. I booked it straight into the car and flooded it back down that road. Going back, I'm sitting there freaking out and explaining to Tyler redundantly how unnatural those arms were when, this time on Tyler's side, the biggest, and I mean absolutely massive, coyote jumps out at Tyler's window. We swerve slightly off the road to avoid it. I don't know about you, but I've never seen a coyote the size of a Great Dane. But again, we both look in the rear view as we are speeding away, definitely in the mirror, in the shape of a doe calmly standing on the road. At this point, we are zooming down the road, frantically trying to comprehend what is occurring, while I notice we are passing where I first saw the scarecrow last time. Tyler was laser focused on driving safely and speedily out of here when I noticed something I still hadn't even told him. Two scarecrows, one on either side of the road slightly in the fields. They were not there on the way in. I have no idea what has even occurred tonight, I don't even believe what I've seen. Giant coyote, deer, and a hillbilly scarecrow cult? That sounds absolutely nuts. Me and my parents rented a van and drove around New Zealand's South Island for 2 weeks, stopping at all sorts of random and deserted places. My dad is a really outdoorsy dude who likes to go off the beaten path, hates touristy places, and prefers to be in the middle of bloody nowhere. At this point, we spent the night in the parking lot of what used to be a psychiatric hospital many years ago. I think it was turned into some sort of camp place because we were allowed to be there and the place was unlocked and furnished. It was very bizarre, to say the least, very oddly furnished and old, lots of very strange pictures on the walls, and the layout of the place was like a maze. I explored it a bit but mainly went inside to use the bathroom. This place was pretty far from any civilization, as far as I can remember, just on a cliff facing the sea. There was an old cemetery just a short walk away that used to be part of the facility. After having some wine and me complaining that I was bored and had no cell service, I convinced my mom to explore the cemetery with me at night. After a few drinks, I don't scare easily, and there was not a soul in sight, so nobody attacked us or anything, and my mom, being the scientist she is, wasn't afraid of ghosts or anything, so off we go. We walk around the place, reading the names on the old graves and the dates, just out of curiosity, feeling pretty sad about those dates that only spanned a few years. We get towards the end, to the oldest graves, and then there is just an open field and trees on the far side. Across the field, I can see two flickering lights, like candles, moving slightly in the wind, just giving off a faint, eerie glow but definitely visible. I can't explain what I felt, but I felt this strong urge to follow them, like an out-of-body urge that I couldn't explain. I told my mom to come, and she freaked the duck out. She just had an unexplainable feeling of fear and dread come over her and grabbed me and forced me back to our van without looking back. We haven't talked about it since. To this day, I don't know what they were. There was nothing out there and no people staying in the area at the time. I had this creepy encounter this evening. It was me and two of my friends. We are the adventurous type, and we love exploring creepy places in our town. We wanted to go to an abandoned building near a field. Previously, we had many paranormal experiences at that place, and that was the main reason we wanted to go there again. As we approached the building, I got a call from another friend who wanted to come too. As I finished the call, I noticed that I was behind my friends. They were walking towards the entrance. I had a bad feeling about this. Suddenly, I saw a white humanoid figure with long arms. For a second, I thought it was my mind playing with me, but I saw it walking to the building and vanished into thin air. I told my friends to run and don't ask me questions. They trusted me, so they ran with me. I explained it to them, and they were freaked out. About 3 years ago, my boyfriend and I were big into urban exploring and driving around to explore the area we live in. We had just started dating at this point and had gone on previous adventures and escapades. However, neither of us had ever had something like this happen before. On a cool autumn night, about a half hour before sundown, we were taking one of our usual explorative drives around our county. We were laughing and making jokes, driving around, and trying to find abandoned buildings to photograph and explore. At some point, we had taken a back road that neither of us had noticed or been down before. As we drove down the road in an excited bewilderment of what we might discover, we came upon a very small town. And I say small town, meaning a row of dilapidated-looking houses, an old convenience store, and a seemingly modern church. We started conversing, stating how neither of us had ever been to this little town or heard of it. While driving down the roadway, my boyfriend and I both noticed that there were no cars, no people, no lights on, nothing indicative of people living there. As we passed the church, the roadway led out onto a different road, and there was a large pond directly in front of us. We began discussing how strange it was that the town seemed empty, abandoned, and almost as if it were a little ghost town. That's when we heard it. At that moment, the entire town was serenaded with extremely loud church music and church bells. My boyfriend and I both looked at each other with a slight panic and confusion. We decided to get out of the car and walk around a little bit, as the area appeared deserted. The music continued, which I can only assume was coming from the church, but it filled the town with such an eerie ambience. I walked towards the church and saw that there was a sign near the entrance. Ironically and creepily enough, the sign read, Pleasant Valley Church. At that moment, I got an unsettling feeling. As my boyfriend continued to walk around and look at the houses with a great deal of skepticism, I called out to him. Hey, I think we should probably go. My boyfriend jogged over and agreed. This is really weird. Let's get the duck out of here. We both got back into the car and drove away from this strange, otherworldly town in silence. After a few moments, my boyfriend broke the silence. Well, that was weird. I nodded and thought about how odd that experience had been. Maybe we should see if we can find this place again? Perhaps it's just a weird little town and no one was home. Who knows? About a week or so later, my boyfriend and I went out on one of our adventures and drove around. We both decided to try to find the ghost town again. I can't tell you how many countless hours we spent driving around our county for months, tirelessly trying to find this place. We never did, and we still never have. Neither of us know or can really explain what exactly happened that evening, but it always chills me to recount the story, knowing that this little town at the edge of the woods seemed to just disappear. So, a while ago, maybe 5 years or so, me and some friends broke into an abandoned house. The front door was completely blocked off and sealed. You would have to destroy it to get in that way. We got in by breaking a window in the backyard and climbing in. It was a long abandoned home. The architecture was early 1900s, maybe even late 1800s. It was quite interesting, actually. We found a bunch of old books, newspapers, and notes gone brownish yellow from age with dates on them from the 1920s 30s. I remember one handwritten note with the date May 1930 something, I can't remember the exact year, but it was the 1930s, at the top, and it said something like, "Dear so-and-so. How's your family? How's your child with the flu? Are they alright?" And blah 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 stuff like that. Anyway, there was shit everywhere. I mean, all over the place. You could barely walk. Destroyed furniture, a doll collection, a broken grand piano, books, and stuff like I already mentioned. This is important to remember. So we went to explore the basement of this house, but we couldn't because the stairs leading down were destroyed. The first 2 steps from the top were there, then a giant gap, then the very last step before the bottom. The stairs, what was left of them, were old and shitty looking. They were cracked, dark brown, and moldy. So we said screw it and left. The next day we went back with another friend, and this time there was a ladder laid flat over the giant gap in the stairs, with the rungs acting like makeshift steps. We thought this was a little weird, but we figured someone else must have come in when we weren't there and laid the ladder over the gap to get to the basement. We ended up climbing down the ladder and exploring ourselves. After that, we left. The next day, for some reason, we went back again. This time, though, the stairs were intact. No ladder, no giant gap. All the steps were there. And I'm not talking repair. If someone had repaired them, they would have looked new compared to everything else in the house, new wood and whatnot. But they didn't. They looked old and shitty, like everything else in this house. Old, dark brown, cracked, moldy wood. These stairs were not repaired, they were never broken to begin with. Which was completely impossible. We had seen them broken the night before, and there's no way someone brought tools into the house through the sealed front door and all the shit lying all over the place and repaired only the steps in one day and left. There's just no way. We kind of freaked out seeing those stairs and left pretty quickly after that. I'm not really a supernatural kind of person. I don't believe in ghosts or even glitches in the Matrix, for that matter, but to this day, those stairs give me the heebie-jeebies. I have no idea how they fixed themselves, and I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. So in a town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan where I grew up, there was an old abandoned orphanage that my friends and I would explore quite often. We never really had anything scary happen until one night. It was in December, if I remember correctly. I was with my boyfriend and another friend of ours. This place is pitch black inside at night, obviously, and even during the daytime, the lower levels are as well. Since it was winter, snow would blow in the broken windows and create ice on the floor and marble staircases, so to mix the slipperiness and darkness, I grabbed onto the back of my boyfriend's jacket as we entered the building and started descending the steps. We went down 3 flights. I saw him when I grabbed onto him. I know it was him. I never let go. I never released my hands, not even for a second. I got to the bottom of the stairs, and he headed to the left down the hall, and I stayed holding on. I walked for a few feet, and then, from the opposite direction down the hall behind me, I heard him say, "Where are you going?" At the same time, the friend we were with said something along the lines of, "What are you doing?" My heart sank, and I immediately let go of whomever I was holding on to and ran to my boyfriend. I have no idea what I experienced. It's by far the scariest moment I can remember. My friend had a bizarre encounter 2 months ago. It happened in Ukraine, a rural area, a village, let's say, where locals stay out due to crazy local rumors about a farmer whose family left him and caused him to be very distant from his neighbors. Locals have told him that the farmer barricaded his house from the inside with all the things he had in the house. He barricaded the house a couple days after his family left him. There were even more disturbing rumors about stolen cows and chickens from the neighbors. They didn't find out exactly how and by whom they were stolen, but they blamed the farmer. They think he practiced animal sacrifice rituals at night so no one would catch him during the day. Now that's all the locals have said about the small, broken mansion of the farmer that my friend got to check, but expect one curious thing. My friend tried to figure out where the farmer went and asked several locals who were living very close to the mansion. Unfortunately, they even don't know. The farmer was so distant and avoided any contact with his neighbors that one day the neighbors who lived near him tried to figure out the farmer's unsocial behavior. One family who lives nearby said they and the other neighbors were worried about his behavior and their kids playing near the farmer's mansion. Several neighbors had entered the mansion to search for the farmer, but they found bizarre stuff instead. Burnt sticks that were shaped similar to looking like dolls, voodoo dolls. Damaged walls and other broken furniture in the house were seen, but not the farmer. The neighbors didn't know what to do, so they left and waited, hoping that maybe he'd come back, but he didn't. Anyway, that's all the rumors and background that he got from the locals. Now my friend's exploration. He got all prepared and got inside the mansion, where he pushed the broken shelves and tables that were barricading his way. The first thing that he told me about entering the mansion was a bizarre paranoia. The one that you get while watching a scary movie or video and checking if there's something behind you. That kind of feeling, but stronger. He saw the damaged walls and the broken furniture scattered around the mansion. The weird stick dolls were actually there too, small and easy to miss, scattered around several rooms. He saw only 7 of them. He told me that he sat on one of the chairs in the living room just to wait for something to happen. He speaks Ukrainian as well, of course, and asked with his EVP loudly if there's someone with him. No reply. He later sat for another several minutes. He said he felt more pressured while sitting there and felt watched from the corners of the house. He had the feeling of just wanting to leave the place, but unwillingly chose to continue to explore more of the mission. The mansion has 2 floors. He never got the second one due to the almost broken environment of the mansion. To cut it short, there was nothing until he came closer to the entrance of the mansion. He told me he felt more and more pressure and got nervous when he came closer and closer to the entrance. He slowly got closer, while his mind told him to run. When he got to the entrance of the mansion, he heard footsteps. They were close to him, he said, and he just took off, sprinting in the field. He has never wanted to do urban exploration since then. I've been so paranoid after this incident. Recently, I was at a party with close friends at a house that was kind of secluded and surrounded by some trees. A few of us were sobering up, and me, 3 other people, and one of the dogs went to a nearby creek behind the house to explore. Everything went fine, and the creek was cool, but we headed back towards the house when one of the guys wanted to adventure on the trail, and the owner of the house took on his dirt bike. We explored a little, and we all dispersed a little bit, but still in the same vicinity. As I was walking back towards the entrance, I heard twigs snapping on my left side. I called to the dog assuming she was going too far, but she came to me from the opposite direction, and as soon as I saw her I rose my flashlight on my phone beside me where I heard the twigs, and literally 10 feet in front of me was a creature that I have never seen before in my entire life, not even in movies. I was literally frozen in place just staring in shock, and the creature took 1 step towards me and I dropped everything I was holding and ran as fast as I could to the exit. I shoved the girl in front of me to push her out of the wooded area and back into the yard, and I kept telling her, we have to get out, we need to get out of here. After everyone came out to see if I was okay, I couldn't stop shaking and I was sobbing so much I couldn't believe what just happened to me. A lot of them didn't believe me, but I was crying so much that some of them were scared too. 2 of the boys went back to get my phone and said they didn't see anything, but it was so real I could see every detail of this creature in front of me. I drew some pictures to try and explain it to people, but literally it's like trying to describe a color no one's ever seen before. The closest I can come to a similar animal is, the creature kind of has this body shape. The legs were tall and skinny. It was covered in a dense grayish white hair and had little brown spots on the legs. The creature did not have a head, it was just hair. There was no face, no eyes, no ears, nothing. It was just nothing there but antlers. I literally cannot get it out of my head. This happened in Texas, if that helps at all or makes a difference. This incident took place in my village, which is located in a mountain range area. And I was around 12 at that time. I was bored, so I decided to explore. The Rial refers to the place between 2 mountains where a small river or water is stored. One thing about this place is that another village is also near it, but the whole village only consists of a house with not even a single person living there. I had a plan to explore, so I was heading downward to the bottom of the village, but out of nowhere, something caught my attention. I looked over to village 2, which was visible from my sight, and what I saw was the only paranormal incident that ever happened. I was seeing a woman in white clothes staring at me and standing in a place where it is impossible to stand. I was frozen at that time, and my reflexes left my body. I was just looking at her face, like she had taken over my control. It was far away, but I was still a child and could feel that she was just standing, and I could focus on her face, which was all burnt and the creepiest thing I had seen, but still I was looking at her. I was thinking, I am dead now, but then my mom called me from behind, and I just got to my senses and ran away as fast as my full potential. I told this to my mom, and she was normal. Then he told me something that still gave me chills. She told me that the Rial refers to the place between 2 mountains where a small river or water is stored, is now used as a cemetery in the village. I was crying inside, but with time that incident got washed away. I found this mirror in the abandoned Moulton and Kyle funeral home in Jacksonville, Florida. I have always loved exploring abandoned places, and this was on my bucket list. I met up with a friend, and we wasted no time and went inside. The place was decaying and falling apart. There was old furniture, caskets, and even a hearse left behind. In the rubble, I found this mirror. I normally don't take things from the places I explore, but there was something about this mirror. I had to take it. My friend didn't like the idea, he found it disrespectful. I didn't listen to him and still took it with me. I hung it in my living room. The next day, my mom and sister came over and told me they didn't like it. They said it made them feel lightheaded and nauseous when they were around it. I was skeptical because I didn't feel any of that. I thought they were just feeling that way because they knew where I got it from. A couple days later, a friend of mine comes over and is immediately drawn to the mirror. I stepped out for a second to answer a phone call. When I came back in, I saw him staring into it as if he were in a trance. I put my hand on his shoulder to ask him if he was okay, and he jumps back and backpedals towards the kitchen. He was breathing hard and on the brink of tears. He told me he saw an elderly version of himself mouthing words with shadow figures swaying back and forth behind him. He left and has refused to come back. I thought it was all in his head until last night. I was lying on my bed, and then I heard footsteps in the living room. I get up to check and see nothing. I was alone. As I was walking back to my room, I stopped and stood right in front of the mirror. I looked directly into it. Almost instantly, I felt like I was in a daze. I began seeing a black mass cover my face from left to right. Then I see a hand reach over my shoulder and wrap around my neck. I snapped out of it and ran to my room. My whole body was cold, and I felt a stinging sensation on my neck. I was terrified but fascinated at the same time. I didn't sleep. I was thinking about it all night. I waited for the sun to come out and then put the mirror in my shed. The city that I went to college in, Marquette, Michigan, had an abandoned Catholic orphanage. There were 5 of us present who all witnessed the same thing. Anyway, the backstory is that the nuns who ran this orphanage back in the day were very strict and cruel. I remember one particular story. A young child went outside to play in the winter, despite the nuns having told the children not to go out because it was too cold. This child then got pneumonia and died. The nuns allegedly displayed the child's body in the lobby of the orphanage as an example to the other children and to demonstrate that the child would still be alive had he or she, I can't remember the gender, listened. The story is that this child haunts the building as a benevolent spirit and often appears as a blue or green orb, generally in the basement area. 4 of my friends and I decided to explore the orphanage one night. It was a bit difficult to get into, but we eventually managed. We had to enter the 2nd floor just because all the doors and windows were boarded up. Initially, nothing really happened, but it was a neat place to see. Then, we went down to the 1st floor. As we were walking down the hallway, I looked to my left, down a stairwell. That's when I saw it, a blue or green orb floating there. After a moment, it quickly darted down the stairwell. I immediately asked my friends if any of them had seen that, and when they said that they hadn't, I told them that I thought it was time to leave. None of them wanted to, so we continued down the hallway. As we approached the end of the hallway, there was a large room right at the end that looked like it may have been a classroom or something. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like children whispering from the classroom. I could tell that everyone else was startled too, and one of my friends said, "All right, it's time to go." After we got out of the building, we all recounted what had just happened. All 5 of us had heard these whispers. If it was just me, I'd think my mind was playing tricks on me, but 5 of us heard it. My friends and I all enjoy finding abandoned places, finding out the history, then going inside and messing around. We don't damage anything. There is this house, about half a city over from the town we live in, and some older lady apparently died in her house. It wasn't found for a while, and the house was closed up. It isn't for sale from what we could tell, but there was also nothing inside the house, which was always odd to me. We all went, and when we walked inside, there was someone who had been there before us and spray painted in big letters, "I died in this house," which is unsettling because I don't want that to be what I think about the entire time. As we're walking around, we all start violently coughing, so we go out the back door to what's behind the house, and there are 2 little farm sheds. I don't know what the duck they're called. These sheds still have full wiring, hay, and everything. There is just no power going to them. After we saw several cops drive by, we started walking back to the house, but not before another female friend of mine and I noticed there was an ungodly amount of dead birds all over the ground. They weren't decomposing yet either, which made it more unsettling. This story happened recently, and for some context, me and my friends are teens who like to explore and do stupid stuff like normal teenagers do. We found this tunnel that was a drain under a busy road. We had to crouch and sit on our skateboards to explore it since the height of the tunnel was short. As we were going deeper into the tunnel, it got pitch black, and the flashlights from our phones could only reach about 5 feet in front of us. So we were blind to what we could come across until we were very close to it. In the tunnel, I remember the wall being painted all red and having sheets of metal with white hand prints connected to clothespins. We decided to keep going until we reached what we thought was a dead end. It was not. On the left, there was a more square tunnel compared to the rectangle shape we were in. In the distance of the connected tunnel, there was a bright light coming from the outside, shining from above onto a red shopping cart with belongings in it. We slowly inched towards the light where the shopping cart was. The light turned out to be a big hole in the ground that we could crawl out of if we needed an escape. As we were about to pass the shopping cart, my friend, who was in the lead, was too afraid to go forward anymore. It was pitch black 5 feet from where we were. I decided to take the lead and keep going. I stepped past the shopping cart and stopped. I don't know what it was, but I was afraid. I had a gut feeling something was back there. I slowly moved back. I stopped. I swear I could have seen something move from the depths of the tunnel. Before I could put everything together, a loud echo of someone pounding an object on the walls of the tunnel struck me back, causing everybody to freak out and crawl out of the escape hole. Once we got out, a homeless man ran to us, asking us what we were doing in there. We told him we were just exploring. He explained to us that there is a man who lives underground in that tunnel, and he would have killed us if we went further. The man was apparently crazy and threw a rock at the poor guy's head before. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but even though that was scary and dangerous, it was fun, and I'm glad I experienced it. It was about 2000 or 2001 when my best friend and I were 12 or 13 years old. We lived in a small town in rural Minnesota with about 2,000 people. Out of our friend group, she and I were the only two that lived out in the country. So we understood not only the boredom that could ensue but also the fun things that would come out of it. Exploring the woods, running around in the cornfields, creating forts, exploring the abandoned house on their property, etc. It was a really fun time for us. One day, we decided to take our bikes and ride down some gravel roads. Her little brother tagged along. He was probably about 9 or 10 at the time. We were riding along, laughing and probably picking on her brother, when we saw an old shack in one of the cornfields. The corn wasn't fully grown, so we were able to see most of it. We decided to explore it because, why not? I'm now 33, so bear with my memory. I don't remember much about the outside, but I do remember what I saw inside, and it still gives me the creeps to this day. We peered inside, and the first thing I noticed were posters on the wall of the room. They were on every wall. There was a different person on every poster, and they looked angry. Some held guns pointed right at you, some were pointing their fingers, and it felt like they were pointing right at us with their eyes trained on us. In the center of the floor was a perfectly painted red circle. My friend and I remember a star in the middle, but her little brother just remembers the circle. As we are staring at this creepy scene, I feel like we are being watched, not by the posters. I look to my right across the gravel road and into the cornfield across from us. Standing in the middle of the field is a man. He's just watching us. He's not waving his arms, not yelling at us, just watching. I alert my friends, and we look at him together. I awkwardly wave, and he continues to just stand there, with no wave back. We are sufficiently creeped out, so we jump on our bikes to get away. We are on gravel, which isn't easy to bike on, so it's taking us a while to get going. We bike away, and I repeatedly turn around to see if he's still there and if he is still watching us. He barely moved and only turned his body slightly in our direction to keep watching. I still can't get over how he just appeared in the middle of a field like that. Growing up, in 2005, on the edge of the suburbs, there was a large grove of trees and hills by some railroad tracks that led to a big forest about half a mile from my house. When I was 9 years old, me and my neighborhood friends would ride our bikes to the railroad tracks and walk to the forest to explore the random pieces of furniture and junk in this peculiar forest. We'd play card games, do homework, and hang with friends out there for about an hour or two, but we never sat out there too long. There were small abandoned houses here and there in this forest that we stayed away from, as one neighborhood friend, Michael, told me there was a homeless man who lived in one of them, and if you saw him, run. So right off the bat, after hearing this, going near this house in the woods was as scary as it could be. One chilly November afternoon, after school, I came home, dropped off my backpack at my house, and immediately went to the woods. My bike was broken, so I walked. Michael had told me at school that day to meet him in this open area of the forest to play Pokemon with him. This was something we'd frequently do growing up, just to pass the time until our parents got home at 4 p.m., so it was nothing unusual. As I crossed the railroad tracks into the forest, I instantly felt a weird sensation, that feeling you feel when someone is watching you. I looked all around and couldn't see anyone, so I thought I was just getting spooked, as the rather overcast day was very eerie anyway. Trekking through the autumn leaves scattered across this large wooded area, I came upon the big open area where I was supposed to meet Michael. Near the area where we normally met was his notebook, open. On the page was written, "Hey, I had to go back home and grab some batteries for my Game Boy. Wait for me here, I'll be back soon. Michael." I waited. Being alone, especially feeling like someone was watching me, made this particular moment very uncomfortable. However, I convinced myself I was just being a wuss and decided to wait for Michael. I sat down and began playing my Game Boy. It wasn't too long until that sensation of being watched grew into utter paranoia. I kept frantically looking up from my Game Boy and checking my watch to see how long I'd been waiting. I'd been sitting there for 30 minutes. It was beginning to get dark. Then, I heard some leaves crunch. I looked in the direction of the sound and briefly saw a dark hooded figure peeking from behind a few trees, hiding back behind them. My skin crawled, and I immediately jumped up from where I was sitting and froze in my tracks, staring. I screamed hello to see if anyone was there. I was quickly reminded I wasn't alone when I saw this tall, dirty-looking hooded man peek back around from the trees. He called back, "Hey buddy." I picked up Michael's notebook and ran for my life. I ran so fast, I barely had time to look behind me. However, I heard leaves crunching not too far behind me. It was the man running after me. He was screaming for me to come back and I just wanted to talk to you. I'm sorry. I began crying as I was running, thinking this was exactly how those missing kids disappeared. I ran and ran and ran until I literally tripped over the railroad tracks and cut up my knees. Michael was just getting to the railroad tracks. He saw me, dirty and bloody and crying hysterically, and I screamed at him to run. Without question, we ran all the way home. The hooded man was nowhere to be seen once we left the railroad tracks. I last saw him standing in the woods, defeated that he couldn't catch me or something. I don't know. I told Michael everything, and we never went back to the woods again. Years later, in 2016, they bulldozed the woods and built a neighborhood there. We later found out from fellow neighborhood friends who were in the area that the same thing happened to them growing up. To this day, this is probably one of my scariest stories growing up. I decided to go to a ghost town a few hours from my house, as I was bored and so was my so. We did our usual snack packing, dog prepping, and car loading. We like to pack out for a few days on a day trip, just in case. We had driven the same route before to get to the town, and we wanted to go a different way to see more of the old, decrepit buildings and mining facilities. Our trip was completely normal until we hit Phillipsburg, Montana. Phillipsburg is a small tourist town on the outskirts of Granite Ghost Town. It's a cool town too. We went through town, which was relatively empty for that time of year, and didn't think much of it. As we went through town to get to the unpaved primitive road, we noticed things looked a bit different and didn't think much of it either. We saw the usual tourists on quads and side by side heading up, so we followed Sweet in my car, long live Subaru 15. After a while, we had to turn around, as the road still had snow and it was pretty washed out. I didn't want to force my way up there only to get stuck out of cell range. We came back down the road, then took a random turn, because, duck it, why not? We spent half an hour roaming around, going where I could fit my car, until we hit what looked to be a tailing pile left in the 50s, when the mining operation was still going. In that area was a burned down or blown up facility that processed ore, I think. Parts were scattered everywhere. It's a mess. We took another random turn after taking some pictures and ended up on another unpaved road. I wedged my car through trees, between rocks, etc. About 3/4 of the way through, something hit my car. It was loud enough to scare me, so I stopped, grabbed my pistol from my glove box, and checked it out. The first thing I noticed was a god-awful smell, and there wasn't anything dead around me that I could see, so I brushed it off. It turns out a stick had hit the roof of my car, and the only way for it to have hit my car would have been if it was thrown. My so told me I was overreacting, so I agreed and got back into the car. A little while later, the same thing happened. I got out, smelt sulfur, got spooked, and kept trekking forward to find a spot to turn around. The road kept getting narrower, to the point of almost losing grip on the passenger side of a cliff. Fun shit. I had finally turned around and headed back to where I turned off, and that's when I saw something. Big, black, almost clear. It just sat there. Watching. Waiting. I'm hoping for me to screw up somehow. It felt evil, even cold. It wasn't supposed to be there. Maybe I wasn't supposed to have been there. I spared no time and hauled ass out of there, hitting rocks and everything else in my path. I have never gone up there again. I don't know what in the duck I saw, but it wasn't natural, and it wasn't pleased to see me. Likewise, I guess.